vastly different philosophies on how to govern have resulted in a partial state budget for the current year. Should the Commonwealth tax you more in order to spend more, or hold the line on spending to prevent rising taxes? Let's spend 5 minutes on that subject with State Representative Marty Causer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sure. And this is the time of the year that typically we're talking about the next budget, which would begin July 1st. But there's still some loose ends on this year's budget. Can you explain where we're at with the budget process?
Well, we're actually operating under a partial budget right now that we're trying to wrap up and come to a conclusion with that proposal, and at the same time working on the next year's budget. So it's sort of uncharted territory where, we've got to wrap up two budget proposals, and it's a pretty difficult situation, but that's our goal right now.
And the legislature made a number of efforts to get full funding and a full budget to the governor, and it hasn't come to fruition. The last thing that was done was in December. A full budget was sent to Governor Wolf, but he did remove he signed it, but removed funding from certain line items. What are some of those line items that did not get the full funding?
Well, the legislature, as you stated, has been working very hard to get a completed budget. We passed actually 3 different budgets in the last year, all to be vetoed by Governor Wolf. And then around Christmas time, the governor vetoed $6 billion out of the last proposal, $3 billion of that being for public schools. So very significant. Also, a significant amount of funding for agriculture programs in particular. So a lot of funding with $6 billion, a lot of funding for very vital programs. Another one being critical access hospitals, something that's very important for rural Pennsylvania. We have a couple of those hospitals just in our region. So very vital funding. Programs that should never have been vetoed. No need to do that. We're working right now to get that funding restored. I've co-sponsored legislation to provide the funding for the hospitals. I've sponsored the legislation to restore funding for the agriculture programs, and the governor is again threatening to veto those bills, but we're working very hard to restore that funding.
Okay. And then he did come in front of the legislature and he laid out a plan for the next budget, which, as I said, if passed on time, would start on July 1st. What kind of proposal did he lay out to the legislature?
Well, the governor's not getting the message. He came forward and laid out another plan that was just a huge tax and spend budget plan that he was building on the previous year, even though we don't have a completed budget for the previous year. So he proposed a $33.3 billion plan that would rely on about $3 billion more in taxes, which is not reasonable, not realistic. And as I said, the governor's not getting the message. There's not support in the legislature for what he's proposing, and he needs to be realistic and look at our situation and look at what the legislature has proposed and meet us halfway. And we've been more than willing to compromise and work with the governor, but when he proposes his unrealistic proposals and then refuses to talk with us, he basically says, give me what I want or I'm not talking to you. Well, that's just not a reasonable proposal and a reasonable stance.
And I guess, we mentioned it in the open, there's 2 very different philosophies about how to govern going forward, and that does seem to be the problem, whether to tax and spend or whether to hold the line. Is that really what it comes down to?
Well, there has to be middle ground. That's the way government works. It has to come down to a compromise, but both sides have to start from reasonable ground in working forward toward a compromise. And from my perspective, the governor is being completely unreasonable. He came into office saying he was going to be a different kind of governor, and he certainly has been a different kind of governor, but he needs to realize that people can't afford what he's proposing. And legislators have heard loud and clear from their constituents that they can't afford a higher income tax, a higher sales tax, or a broadening of the base of the sales tax. He's also proposing increased cigarette taxes and surcharges on insurance, and just a whole litany of tax increases that people have told us loud and clear they cannot support. Now, there are times in government where you do need to raise additional revenues. That does happen, but you need to be responsible to the taxpayer, and Governor Wolf is not being responsible at this point.
So if that's where we're at, then what is the next step for the process going forward?
Well, the governor did present his proposal just last month, and now our appropriations committees in both the House and Senate are holding hearings with the agency heads coming forward and really looking at the details of what the governor's proposal entails and asking some really pointed questions, and as I said, looking at the details as we work toward finding middle ground and crafting a final proposal. My hope is that we can wrap this up very soon and actually wrap up both budgets in a timely manner.
Well, thank you so much for the update. I'm sure folks back home are glad to hear the information that you have to share with them, and I know you'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And if you have comments or questions about this or any other legislative topic, Representative Causer's contact information will be on the screen in just a few seconds. I'm Laurie Bull. Thanks for spending a few minutes with State Representative Marty Causer.